All right, so for this first one, which was eval, this was just fine, mean the standard deviation, which is from the day before. I'm writing this out as if it is a test question. It gave us x, it's mu of x, so I'd write 10 times 0.32 plus 20 times 0.27. So I'll write out all of these if it were a test question. And I get what is the mean. And what are my units? To show my work for standard deviation, I'm taking square root of, it'd be 10 what?
Minus 23.8 squared times 0.45.
And then to the next one, 20 minus 23.8. Do I need to write out that whole thing? I know I'm doing better about writing things out, but I think this one y'all are fine with. So you would write it out all the way to, it would end with 50 minus 23.8 squared times what? 0.07. That would be the end of what goes over there. And you end up getting, what is your standard deviation?
12.6317.
So one thing I want to incorporate that I did not ask you to do here. Let's interpret that. So I don't care if you have your paper out where I said, hey, this is our interpret sentence, but I want you following along with me to be okay with how you fill it in. So it starts out with if what? What's our interpret mean sentence? If many. So if many, what? What would we be doing over and over here? The 23.8 points is for one what? One roll. So if many what? Rolls were randomly selected, we expect the average what? Points per roll or value of points scored to be what word? About 23.8 points. And we expect the number of what? Points or points per roll to vary from the mean of 23.8 points by an average of what word? About 12.6317 points. We go with that because I don't think I went over many of these yesterday with context, how you plug it in. Alright, so part B didn't really ask much of a question, just told you what's going on. So let's use this to define it. So I'm going to do this as let T, because it ended up saying in part C that you're finding mu of T and sigma of T, but it didn't define it anywhere for you, so we had to define it. So why do you think it said T?
I don't know.
Or tickets? Whichever way you want to look at it. So I'm going to write this as the number of tickets. One. If you wanted to write it that way, you could do this. That's not very helpful to you right now. Maybe I'd choose to write it as, that's fine. But I also want to, for explanation, write out more specific what mathematically is going on here. What does this mean? Mathematically, what is that telling me?
So I just scored by 10.
How did you know that?
Huh? So if you get one ticket for every 10 points, so every time I get 10 tickets, I get 1 point, so I divided it.
Okay, so that's how you would find it.
And so I divide my score by 10 to get my tickets, but then what is this saying?
Gonna add.
So you didn't necessarily have to write out the red. I'm writing out the red to say, hey, this is mathematically what this wording was telling us. Because the one ticket received from the game was a one-time deal. It didn't matter how many points you got, so that's an add or subtract, not multiply, divide. The one ticket for every 10 points scored, it mattered how many points you scored, so that is a multiply or divide thing. Any questions on figuring out that part or break down how you got there? All right, so now I'm using that to actually do this part. So I am finding U of t. So what work should I show there? What am I starting with? I'm not starting with mu of t, I'm starting with mu of what? What do I do with mu of x? And then do what with it? So now I'm plugging in my numbers. What was mu of x? Well, 23.8 divided by 10 gives me what? And I'm adding 1 to it, so. And now what are my units? Because everything with me works exactly like you would think it would. If it tells me I'm going to divide by 10 and then add 1, I'm going to divide by 10 and then add 1. Does standard deviation do exactly what it says you're going to do? No. What is standard deviation not affected by? Adding or subtracting. So for this one, your sigma of t is going to be what? And I don't add 1 because it's not affected by adding, subtracting. What was my sigma of x? And usually I do everything to 4 decimals, but there's no reason to just drop 2 decimals for no reason, or drop a decimal for no reason. And if I wanted to interpret, I could go through and use that same interpret sentence. I would basically just plug in different numbers. Yeah. If many roles of the skee ball or roles of the game were played or randomly selected, we expect the average number of tickets won to be 3.38, to be about 3.38 tickets. And we expect the number of tickets won per roll to vary from that mean of 3.38 tickets by an average of about 1.26317 tickets. So be plugging in the same thing, just essentially with the different numbers. All right, so that gets us through all of our skee ball. For this example, well, part of this should have been really easy, really easy. Why?
You're just gonna turn that back on.
Even easier than that. Anyone realize how part of this is extremely easy?
We already did it.
We already did it. So, to get my bonus from my sales, I start with what? And I do what with that? Then I'm plugging in my number. That was 1.1 times 500, or 500, which gives me what? And what were my units? So that one we had already done. This one we hadn't. So this one I start with what? U of y, and do what with that? Multiply it by 300. And again, I'm multiplying here because it matters how many cars I sold or leased. So I'm multiplying something to it, which was 0.07 times 300, which gives me what? which is also units of dollars, $210. So I'm just multiplying. So how do I get sigma here? How do I get sigma for my bonus? Because I do multiply directly to standard deviation, I just don't add or subtract. And then so my original standard deviation was point, and this is one we had also already done in the notes, and that gave you so then here I'm starting with what sigma? I do what with sigma y? Multiply by what? 300. My sigma of y was 0.6403. And that gives me 192.09. So here I want to know my total bonus. So what do I do with my average? How do I get mu of t?
Add mu.
Mu of?
BS.
So I have my 550 plus my 210, which gives me a total of what about here? What are my two rules with standard deviation, combining them?
Variance.
Always variance and always add. So I have to start with what? Square root, because I'm going to have variance, I got to go back. And I want the variance of my first one, so I take my sigma of BS and do what with it? Square it. I also take my sigma of BL, square it. And then I just show my numbers plugged in there, 471.7 squared plus 192.09 squared. Add those together, take the square root of it, and you get what? Does anybody get a little different than that? I got 509 something.
Yeah, I got
509, 3.
3.7.
Try to type that. One of these numbers, just barely off.
And then what's our unit?
What's our unit?
$.
Questions on either of those two? So this, let me explain though, this process right here, this answer could have been done without these steps, and you do it all in one step together, and if you look somewhere else, you might see a problem like that worked out where they do two things at once. I think it's easier, especially at the pace we're going, to separate it and be able to think through it in pieces. Alright, and the last one, here I told you have to assume that they're independent, which is a terrible example because your SAT and your reading SAT score are actually not going to be independent, because if you typically, somebody does really well on one, will do really well on the other, generally speaking, not me. I can't read. My SAT score was terrible. So we have to start by defining something. I'm just going to do T as my total. So now I'd write mu of T equals what? This part should be really easy. And I plug in my numbers, so 519 plus 507, which gives me what? This is another one of those where score points. I would write some kind of unit just so that if you go look at it, you remember you need units there. How do I do sigma of t?
Square root of sigma x squared plus sigma y squared.
So that gives me 115 squared plus 111 squared. Add together, get the square root, and you get 159.8312. Again, something with units. Questions with any of that with the homework?